I do sincerely believe that for sustainable um, food supply, it's important to have a combination of approaches. And I think probably the most least expensive, most long-term practical is storage of whole grains and beans and growing some fresh things and then filling in with whatever else is accessible to you. The other thing that I believe strongly is that we glean from one another. And just in these little conversations in between, we learn so much. Like someone was just telling me about a suburban garden with how they grow all the way around the fence and even train the fruit trees onto the fence. And I was, in my mind, I was thinking, really cool, but I'm wondering about the shading. And then she said, it's a chain link fence. So the things can be attached to the fence. So they use the chain link for their vertical growing. Makes sense, doesn't it? So you use what you have. Take a look at your space and talk to the Lord about it. And then look at which season. Is there a season that you're more available than another season? Then concentrate on that. If you know you are always gone in August, then start early and do the early crops. In Missouri, we can have several plantings of green beans typically. Normally, starting like early August, we have great fall beans. Not every year, but a lot of years we do. And your area will have those things that are dependably can be planted over and over again. So work with what works for you. There is no one size fits all. And then and I know this overlaps, but it is gardening and it's storage both, because I've talked about some vegetables, and I had mentioned potatoes a little bit. Potatoes take a lot of space to grow. And I do know that, there are all these little methods you can do, the tires and the bags and all that thing. But basically, you're just getting a hill of potatoes. And they may yield really well, but you're investing a lot in that. And I think if you have a friend who has space, trade off with them. You grow something that grows well for you, let them grow your potatoes. But I will tell you that potatoes are heavily, heavily sprayed. If in your own mind you're thinking which vegetables I would rather purchase and which ones I feel like I need to grow myself for safety, I had no clue potatoes are so heavily sprayed. And you wouldn't think it. You just wouldn't think it, but they are. So they are a crop that if you're concerned about the pesticide use, you should make a way to have grown for yourself. And anyway, and again, a lot of this overlaps. I want to address some things that came up since yesterday and tie some gardening things into it. Several of you, I did not have the printouts of the 1-year plan, the 3-month plan that I had created for the Prepare the Way website. We'd had dealt with a computer crash and then some miscommunication, and I just didn't get here with them. So I have copies today. I only have, I think, like 15 copies. So if you're a husband and wife, if you would just take one. But if that's something you're interested in working with, just for a worksheet to help you think through, okay, have I covered my bases here? I mean, by itself, it is a plan that could stand alone. And you can use it for that, certainly. And it's valid for that. But it's also good for, I think, a reference, just to see if your amounts are coming out and if you've thought about everything. I love that dialogue with people, because we do. We get on a path and we're going forward, and they go, I forgot that. And that's where our friend comes alongside, encourages us, and gives direction. Another thing is, I had mentioned the Alpine Air Food supply that we're getting, and I talked about some of the plans they offer. I've got that in this catalog here. There is just one right now. There will be more later, but you can pass that around and look at it. Like if you want to see what some of what they call their versatile plan, their gourmet plan, their basic plan, what those look like and how they line up with the one that I created. You're welcome to do that too. And I will tell you again, basic products are going to be the same no matter where. If you buy from any company, pretty much, like freeze-dried strawberries, you're going to be freeze-dried strawberries, okay? Because the suppliers are almost all the same back in the original suppliers. Where it's different is in the entrees. Vastly different in the entrees. Like we have a bucket we got just for basically just as a sample thing to see what it was from Costco of, I don't know, 225 servings or meals for $75 or something anyway, a couple years ago, and pulled it out and tried it. And I would hate to think that's what I was feeding my family. I mean, you could make soup bases from it, but it was what we paid for, generally. And then you can go all the way to the furthest extreme the other way and get like freeze-dried entrees that are just the best of the best, and you end up paying for those too. So it's kind of like, I don't know that I could say you get what you pay for across the board, because I think some companies just make wiser choices than others. I guess what I'm saying to you is read your labels. Be very careful that you're reading your labels on those. So that's why I was saying, if you're thinking of an entree type food, that's why I liked these Alpine Air so much, because I appreciated their advertising. I like that they don't put all the additives in, and they just do some things that I'm not confident with the labeling. If a company doesn't label it, I want to know why, basically, because I really want to know what they're offering. And that's one reason I like that so much. And another thing to kind of piggyback on that, another conversation I had with someone, she lives alone, but she has a heart to care for people. And she's thinking, okay, so this is a big leap, living alone, and then what if I'm preparing for a crowd, or maybe it's just wanting to help my neighbor? How can I store food ahead for that? So we were kind of dialoguing about that. And this is what we came up with. Have supplies for a few meals that you could do in large quantities, like the beans and rice. Easy to store beans, easy to store rice, easy to store seasonings, right? Or like a bean soup or a vegetable soup made with dehydrated type vegetables and base. Some of those, just real basic, hearty, large pot meals. And have on hand supplies to do that, along with a guide sheet or recipe generally. You always have to improvise, but of what you're working with, so that under stress, you don't have to stop and think it through. Okay? And then you could also have some number 10 cans of freeze-dried entrees. So conceivably, someone comes to the door and they're needing something, you could hand them the can. They could add hot or cold water and feed a family of, it's like 10 one-cup servings. So, you could feed a family fairly well. And it's something in hand that you could give them. So that's an application I really hadn't thought of before. The other way you could create that is the make-a-mix. And you're hearing a lot about the make-a-mix cooking now. That's kind of, it cycles around. I have make-a-mix cookbook from the 80s that I have used a lot, and it's coming around again with new ideas. And essentially, you're putting together your own soup mixes. Okay, that's great, and it's a convenience thing. The thing I want to caution you about, though, is they take on the shelf life of your least the ingredient that goes old the fastest. I'm not thinking of the words to use. For example, brown rice is something I like in a soup, but if I was adding it to my soup mix along with lentils and beans or whatever I was putting in it, then the soup mix would not last as long because I've added the brown rice. Make sense? So it's really better to do those for make up 6 months worth of things you're really going to use, or 3 months worth at one time. Open your ingredients. If everything you have is in number 10 cans and you're wanting to pull out lentils or beans or whatever and make up soup mixes, do enough to last say that period of time. But don't make them for long-term storage. And then you could conceivably with that too have some soups made up or mixes and hand them to someone with a recipe for finishing it up. Now most of those require cooking. So, that takes on a different, or having just anything can, but in thinking about how you can serve others as well, because your situations are different and the thing that God has put on your heart is different. All right. Another thing I want to add to something I heard maybe this morning when Rod was talking about FEMA meetings. I'm not sure what triggered this, but I don't think I told you yesterday. Earlier in the year, suddenly Mountain House cans were just in short supply everywhere. And I don't know if you're aware of one of the major reasons is FEMA put in a huge order. I mean, I don't even remember how big it was, but they bought up the supply back in February, early March. So that's why. And then there has been increased demand too. But that it wasn't just increased demand. It was that FEMA bought up so much. So that has put, like if you see it on websites or catalogs, the Mountain House cans, some of them won't even, take orders for them still. They're starting to get a supply going again. But then a lot of the other suppliers, the others have been a little faster than Mountain House, but there's been a backlog of a lot of them. And some of it trickles back to that. And they're expanding facilities. And I know, like Alpine Air, that's been one of the things Terry dialogued with them about, is how fast could we get products, because that's an issue with some of the companies. Okay, and again, with all of this, a lot of it has to do with our state of mind. Are we taking it as a challenge, or are we looking at the negative? Because to me, if we're focusing on this food, then I'm paying attention to health, right? Nutrition, that's positive. And I'm paying attention to what I'm buying, that's positive. And I'm paying attention to what I'm eating or what I'm planning for others to eat, and that's positive. It's not a mindless thing, because we get in this routine and we get busy, and it's like, I'm hungry, I don't care what it is, I just want food. And over the long haul, we just, we can do that occasionally, but over the long haul, we really need to think about health. And now, while things are simple, we need to really be thinking about it. Adjusting those eating habits so that we're feeding our bodies well and that we're exercising. Because if we're thinking that we're going to care for a whole lot of people and we can't hardly drag ourselves out of bed to take care of ourselves, there's a disconnect there. And there are always going to be people who don't have the option. I mean, sometimes it's people are making bad choices. Not always. Some people have medical issues. They don't have the option. And those of us who can make the choices need to be there for them. So we need to just be faithful with what we've got, really faithful with what we've got, and be at a place where we can reach out and care for other people when that opportunity presents itself. And another thing we've kind of been talking about is if we need to be honest with ourselves. If we never open our door for hospitality now, do we really think we will? If things get tight. It's like who we are is what we live now. It may be a different degree and a different application, but it's what's in our heart now that when we're under stress is going to be manifest. So it's one, if we're saying, oh, my house is going to be a place of refuge and I want to take care of, 20 people, but we never open our door to our neighbor now, there's a disconnect. So I just really feel this thing from the Lord that we need to be honest with ourselves and just refocus our lives. It's a continuous process, because fortunately He doesn't highlight everything at once. We get to work on one thing and then we move to another thing and to another thing. And then as you work with other people, you find out their giftings and their hearts. And sometimes that can be rough, like in families. Sometimes it is. But like in families, you stick together. The same thing happens with friends and those that you've walked through things with. You get to this place where there's an understanding and appreciation. So understand all of that just as a context for how I'm using this food thing. I want, as you think about food storage, food purposes, to know my heart, and to even I would challenge you to examine your own heart and why you're doing it, and long-term purposes for it. So let's dive into some of the specifics here. Next slide. Yes. When you store this food, you've got to protect it from, it's a terrible acronym, I know, but PLOHTT. First one is pests. You always think about pests first. And they're usually not the biggest issue. But the way to handle the pests, you start with clean containers, clean environment, purchase fresh products. Okay? Check for insects, other pests before preparing for storage. Definitely keep them away from rodents, roaches, that kind of thing. However, those weevils that get in your grain, if you've done everything right, you think, and you've still got them, they may be unappealing, but they won't hurt you. And you can sift them out. You can heat the grain and sift them out, because if you're hungry, you're going to want that. Another thing you can do for those, and some people feel strongly against this. If you take the approach and freeze it the way Terry was suggesting yesterday, this isn't an issue, okay, with the insects. But if you have some you've stored at home or storing at home, and you've heard of the diatomaceous earth, my sack is actually leaking a little bit. But if you've not seen that stuff, this is what it looks like. It's a real powdery thing, and you would use it like in, I think I've discovered the leak, grains or pastas, dried things. And you put it, it's like, I think, 1 1/4 cups of the diatomaceous earth in every 5-gallon container, and you shake it around and make sure the food is coated. There's no shelf life, so anything that hatches, it takes care of. The thing that's nice about this stuff, though, it's good in the garden, too. It works on those, sprinkle it around for insects in the garden. So it has multiple purposes. The other thing, the second thing is light. Protect your storage from light, particularly if you have home dehydrated things or home canned things in the jars, to keep them in dark places. Then the 4 primary methods to remove oxygen, and this is kind of a review, but a pulling together what we talked about yesterday. Vacuum pack, okay, and I mentioned that the vacuum sealers, you can do the bags, you can also do the jars, and if you are a single person or 2 people in your home and you do not have a lot of space, want to do it inexpensively, there's probably some neighbor that bought a vacuum sealer somewhere that's never used it. That's one of those items that some people don't. Or there's one in a garage sale that you could pick up. And you can take smaller quantities of food. Perhaps you've bought, 10 pounds of beans at Sam's or something. Bring it home and vacuum pack it. If you do it in jars, they're reusable. The bags are kind of expensive. But you could do it in bags and then put them down in a bucket with a lid, which would protect them, or a tub with a lid. Or you could do jars, and because there's an attachment for jars. And very inexpensively, like in a 5-gallon bucket, you could store quite a bit of food prepackaged. You could prepackage soup mixes that way, or you could just do smaller quantities of items that way, so that when you're opening them, you're not exposing them to so much air. So a tip for small family. Another thing you can do, and I was going to try this before I came, and I just ran out of time, the dry ice. I've never used that, my understanding. Have any of you packaged with dry ice? It used to be hard to find. The grocery stores have it now. And basically, it requires careful handling, but it's inexpensive. And about 1/3 a cup will protect a 5-gallon bucket. So the thing you need to think of with that and with oxygen absorbers both is an assembly line. You get everything in place, and then you get your oxygen absorbers open or your dry ice, and then you work them in an assembly line. So be sure everything's there. Nitrogen flush is something that's not done individually, but commercially it's done. And you'll read that sometimes on cans that you've purchased, that's how the oxygen's been removed. And then food needs to be stored at less than 15% humidity. That is hard sometimes with home dehydrated foods, is keeping them dry. You have to be careful with that. And then the time, rotate. And the biggest thing is temperature. Of all these things, probably the biggest culprit for food deterioration is the temperature. So controlling the temperature is the number 1 factor. Cool and constant. For each 10 degrees the temperature is lowered, shelf life almost doubles. The standard's 70. So if your basement stays around 60, your shelf life doubles. But if you use an attic, it reduces it dramatically. See, so as cool as possible. Now, again, if your situation is not ideal, just take note of that. Perhaps you could, close off a closet and keep it cooler. Perhaps you could just the foods that are more vulnerable, store in those carefully controlled places, and other foods like this. I don't recommend this, but I'm going to be honest about it. We bought a bunch of wheat in the bucket, sealed wheat, back in, the 90s that I'm still using. And at that time we lived in a farmhouse, and it was not air conditioned, and we had crawl space. So we kept our wheat on pallets out in an outbuilding. Now, there was no rodent issue. Nothing got, into them, buckets or anything. They were not compromised. But temperature extremes to the max, cold and hot. And I brought that wheat now to the house we're in now, and it's in a carefully climate-controlled basement. I cleaned up the outside of those nasty buckets and put it down there, and every one I've opened has been fine. Now, wheat stores easily, though. And see, I'm sure there was some deterioration of quality, but it's edible and it's making good bread. Now, you could never pull that off with cracked rye or rolled oats or something like that, but wheat and white rice. So if you have just nowhere else to put it but in a garage and something's got to go out there, it would have to be, probably wheat or white rice. Anything else you need to take better care of. And that's just practical speaking. That's not because I recommend you do that. The best thing is less than 70 degrees, dark, dry, all that. Okay, so then you've done all that right. So then you've got all this food, and what are you going to do with it? How will you prepare it? I'm going to ask you, and shout it out loud, and I'll try to repeat it for the microphone for the tape. But what is your alternative method for cooking? Sun oven, okay? Okay, a wood-burning stove with a ledge. Propane grill or propane generator to run whatever's in the house, okay? Charcoal grill. The key on those grill things, that's a great alternative. Just be sure you have extra stored, and then it's stored dry and carefully. Propane, has to be handled carefully, and then charcoal has to be kept dry. But you can go a while with that and do some one-dish meals. You can cook a lot of things on a grill. Anything else? Any camp stoves that you recommend? Anything have you thought about what you could use inside if you needed to? Fireplace, yeah. Cast iron cookware. One thing leads to another. Campfire, Now, inside is the trick. Sometimes in bad weather, just having that alternate if there's something, because you have to be very careful with fuels. Not everything can be used inside, so be sure that you're doing it with great care. And the other thing is be sure that you have fire extinguishers. You're very careful about fire, because if truly you're in an emergency, there will not be emergency personnel available to help you, probably, if something comes up. They'll have other things going on. So you have to be exceptionally careful. We are fortunate because we have propane. And so when we built our house, we put in a propane range. And we burn wood for heat in the winter. So even with using it for backup, we only use like 300 gallons a year for heating, hot water, everything. So if we were only cooking with it, we could go on and on and on. That would be a great option too. And then wood stove. If the emergency is only like 3 to 5 days, that grill issue would work. Another thing, how about refrigeration? Have you thought about that? That's not the time to open the refrigerator door and stare inside. One recommended thing is to have an ice chest ready, and then anything that you would be getting in and out of the refrigerator for, move to that ice chest so that you're not opening that door, and that'll preserve things a little longer. The other thing is, for those who have freezers, chest freezers are better, will keep the food longer, but obviously keeping it full is better. You've heard that. Another emergency man, just people, he's from Alaska, and they had a lot of power outages there, I guess. But he said what they always did is they lined the bottom of their chest freezer with the 2-liter pop bottles full of water, froze them, okay? So then when their power outage happened, the freezer functioned like an ice chest, and then they had water. So I thought that's ingenious, because most people with chest freezers don't keep them full. And that's something you can do for free. So just those good little ideas. Okay, the equipment might be different than what you commonly use. Absolutely, a non-electric can opener. Heavy-duty pots. And we were talking about yesterday, I made reference to something to stir those big pots with. And someone said a children's canoe paddle. And I thought, I'd never thought about that. And I bet that would work. So be thinking ahead about those items that might have even dual purpose items. I think it's even better. Cast iron Dutch ovens. You can do so many things with those. And even the Dutch oven cookery is a whole cookbook in and of itself. And then, of course, sometimes we need a reality check. The campfire, I think, is the next slide. Yeah, it's a little fuzzy. But it's not necessarily like sitting by this wonderful campfire roasting marshmallows. I mean, our expectation of what we're going to eat at a meal now, or even our expectation of what we're grilling out, it's different in an emergency situation. So our expectations need to coordinate with that. And I read that whole journal thing to you yesterday about our ancestors, or it could have been yours or mine. In this case, it was a real story and what they dealt with. And again, I think that sometimes when we're being picky about, well, I don't like greens on my plate, or I don't like this or that, we need to think about those things and realize how good we've got it and really appreciate what we have right now. It's not this nostalgic thing of, walking across the prairie. Our ancestors had to be tough. They had courage and they had perseverance, or they didn't survive. And we have a lot to learn from those stories. Okay, the other thing, the next one, is definitely consider your family. Practical, purposeful planning is essential. Your goal is to stay safe, to work together, to care for one another and perhaps others that you've identified in your neighborhood. This also applies in meal preparation. How much effort you put into it depends on your household. Winter, teenagers, huge appetites, very different than an elderly person with, we were talking about the examples with even swallowing problems. Infants, gluten intolerance, diabetes. I mean, any of those things that we're dealing with, working with now, we need to be thinking about what our plan is and how we're going to address those things. If there's an interruption, and again, it could be, we don't know. 3-day things are often around here. It could be 2 weeks, it could be longer, but we still need a plan in place. And then children love this stuff. Our boys used to beg us to turn off the electricity and pretend we're camping all weekend. And I was the one who was like, oh no, it's too much work. Because it is. But kids love it. They like the idea of learning to cook on a campfire. They will be your biggest fans of doing this as long as your attitude is in it and your encouragement in it. And then just those things that you have sitting around that you don't necessarily use much, see if they have another purpose, like the old fondue pots. What fun in the middle of an emergency. Say the lights have been out, everybody's kind of cold and it's dark, and whatever you had for dinner wasn't real great, to pull out the fondue pot and do something in that. Find something you can dip in that, or make whatever you're doing fun. And then if you're one of those young singles or that live in a car, basically, that's where your things need to be. Or if you travel, you need to have it with you. One of the most vulnerable places is for people who are flying. That's tough now. And but keep that in mind, that if you were stranded at that airport, or if you were wherever you are, or in your car, do you have what you would need for 2 to 3 days? Okay, and then I think the next one. Yeah, the menu ideas from stored foods. Start collecting your ideas. And I mentioned this little cookbook yesterday, and honestly, this was my whole approach, because I started with things real people eat, and I thought about how we could adjust them for long term. You always try to combine fresh things with stored things. Even if you're using an entree from a canned product, a canned entree, you could still stir in fresh for nutrition, for interest. That's the time you could start sprouting. You could do just make use of what is available. If you can keep herbs going year-round, and some of them are very simple, or bring them in a pot and keep them inside in the winter, just to add that extra bit of flavor to an otherwise bland meal. Adds a lot of interest. I wanted to show you a couple, thinking about versatility in cooking methods. I mentioned that this was one of my goals too, is that, and you can go the next slide or not, it really doesn't matter, I guess. That's kind of was my approach in here, is why I wanted to draw attention to it. But like thermos cooking, I don't think anybody carries their coffee around in one of these. They used to be a thing commonly available in homes. But these things keep things really hot. And yogurt can be made in it very successfully on the countertop. Cooked cereals, bulgur dishes, or if you want like a rice, you have a rice mix. Now, not like a brown rice because it would take too long to cook, but a shorter cooking rice. You could pour your hot water in it, take it with you, and have a hot lunch. Some of those things that have been, gone the way of the past when microwaves came in, we can pull those out and make use of those. And then I've mentioned sprouting, and the first thing people think is, oh, I need a sprouter and I need all this stuff. You really don't. Cheesecloth on the top of a canning jar, and I meant to bring a piece with me and didn't, with a little screw-on lid, is all you need. And I have these little cheapo plastic lids that I use based on seed size. Again, very inexpensive. I've been using them for 20 years, just with a jar. And you just, like lentils, honestly, in 2 days, you can use those sprouts. Now, one person had asked about sprouting. They were concerned about just the contamination, because sometimes you hear about sprouts from grocery stores and restaurants, that being a danger. And I've done some checking on that, and this is my understanding, according to people who know more about it than me, that as long as you are rinsing and taking care of them, eating them fresh, you're fine. The problem comes when they're done commercially and they're not handled well. So, if that helps you, if you've had concerns about sprouts with that. The other thing is that I have included in there are some mixes, but I mentioned the shelf life of the mix becomes vulnerable, depending on what you're using in it. Also, not very many meats, because meats are harder to store and expensive. So begin thinking of them as flavoring rather than the main part of the meal. Also, divided meals between breakfast and main meal, because probably you're not going to be cooking 3 meals a day. You'd probably be finishing off something from the midday meal in the evening, something like that. So as you're going through what you typically cook, put it through this grid and see what would work, what would apply. And then I believe that the best overall thing is keep foods as close to their natural state as possible for the most nutrition. And people they have varying opinions about what they can eat, should eat, what's nutritious for them, and I realize that and understand that. But that's one of those things that kind of covers all the bases. Keep it as close to the natural state as possible. And then if you have to eat from dehydrated foods, stored foods, then try to incorporate fresh fruits and vegetables. Planning ahead helps keep you from being part of the problem. Okay, and then next slide. Okay, so review. Let's see if I've missed anything. No exotic ingredients. We're really used to the exotic ingredients. We're spoiled that way. Might not always be there for us. Always consider nutrition. Consider fuel and water requirements in preparation. Yeah. Stop and think through how long it's going to take to cook. Dehydrated takes longer. It's cheaper, but it takes longer. And then learning to sprout and getting used to using your sprouts. Okay, next one. What about home food preservation? We haven't really addressed this much, and I don't have time to get into it a whole lot here, but I want to draw your attention to something. Stay safe. And again, in Missouri, we have our great extension office, and I don't think I've pulled my guide up here, but the same ones that produce the vegetable guides produce guides to home food preservation. They're free. They're available online. And they will also, if you do pressure cook canning, they will check the pressure gauge. And in our county, it's free of charge, so that you know what you're working with and your equipment is sound. But this is the dilemma with canning, home canning. People who've not done it before. Okay, let me ask you, how many of you have done home canning with pressure canner before? Okay, pretty limited. That's what I thought. Me and my buddies, huh? It's not done a lot. So if it's something you are interested in learning, I would recommend that you go to your extension office for information, because it's safe, it's tested. Okay? There are guidelines. It's not hard, but there are guidelines that are very, very important that you follow. And they have freebie information, and they have great recipes. So do that first. And then investing in a canner is a major investment. But if you have lots of vegetables coming in, fruits and vegetables, it's a great way to use them. Okay, so you need to think about scale, because if it's large scale, it's a great way to do it. If you're a single and you're moving around, or you really don't have a good place to garden, probably not a good idea. You'd have another option. But that pressure canner has to be used for low acid vegetables like green beans, potatoes. Anytime you use a mixture that's proportioned to different, even if you switch around your salsa recipe and put too many green peppers in it, you have to process it longer, and there are standards for that. And then water bath is done for fruits usually. You can just convert any big pot for that. And they have to boil a certain amount of time. The water does. You dip them in, and it's simple. Again, go to your extension office, though, for your information. And then drying is the other thing. And we've talked about commercial dehydration, but home food dryers are really practical and simple. I've been making like cucumber chips that could be used like vegetable chips. No processing involved. This is a whole head of cabbage, dried and crushed in here, that I'll use for soups. Now, I need to put a better seal on it. I need to get it out of the light, but I wanted you to see it. This cabbage was getting, it got hot really fast this year, so it wasn't real sweet to eat raw, and I wanted to do something with it. Wasn't ready to try sauerkraut at that point, so I dehydrated it and crushed it up in 1 quart jar. So 1 head of cabbage is a lot of cabbage for 1 quart jar. Keep that in mind. You can do this, and you could seal it and with a vacuum sealer, and you don't have much investment. The dehydrators are relatively inexpensive, and the vacuum sealers are relatively inexpensive. So if you're wanting to go a low-scale home food preservation, that might be a way you could do it. And you don't have to worry about these things going bad. What would happen is that they got too much moisture, they would get moldy or look old, and you would see it. You're supposed to rotate it more carefully. You keep it dry and check it, but it's not like the danger in home canned foods that's done incorrectly. That really can be serious. Okay, questions with that? Yes. Okay, yeah, those classes, great place to start. I definitely recommend you do that. Don't go to I don't know. I just hear stories like the temperature, the pressure is supposed to be like 240 degrees for certain things within the canner, and there was a situation where someone was thinking she could turn her oven to 240 degrees and put her jars in there. It would adequately process. And you just hear those things, and they're scary because with like a low acid process, it's rare, but the botulism grows in an anaerobic environment, so it grows in there without air, and then you don't know, you can't smell it. It's not like it looks spoiled. So it's something you don't want to mess with. So as long as you do it properly, there's no danger. But if you were like one of those people who did your green beans in the home oven at 240 degrees, and just because they sealed, or you poured hot water in and turned them on the counter, and because they sealed, you thought they were safe? Not at all. Now, that might work for a jelly or something with a lot of sugar, or if it's pure vinegar or a pickle or something, but not low-acid things. So do follow the directions. But otherwise, it's not hard to do, and just go to the source to find out how and why, and that's what I want to leave you with on that. Okay, I'm going to just tell you some menu ideas of things you could cook with some of these things you've stored and brought from your garden. These are a lot of the recipes are in the little cookbook, but this will just trigger your thinking. Black bean soup with cornbread. Burritos with refried beans served with Southwest pasta salad. Cheesy potato soup. See, we're getting close to lunch, so I can do this to you now. Cheesy potato soup and brown bread. The brown bread, this recipe was cooked on a pizza stone on the grill, and you can steam it too. But the problem with steaming is it takes, depending on the size of your loaf, between an hour and a half and 3 hours to steam bread. So you would have to like have a campfire going. I don't know, there's fuel issues there. I just don't know that you would want to use that much fuel for it, but it does work. Vegetable soup with some sort of bread or crackers, canned or dried fruit. You can do chicken and noodles. Pasta, homemade pasta is easy. And that's something, dumplings. And right now, you may be thinking, hey, I eat salads and fresh. But if you're putting in a lot of physical labor, or you have hungry people in your house, you want to fill them up, put dumplings in that soup. Sprouted lentil soup with dumplings, black bean salad with bulgur mexicana, beans and rice served with your applesauce from your dried apples, creamy rotini with chicken, with seasonal fresh vegetables, egg fried rice with vegetables. Fried rice is something you can really do a lot with. If you have a source of eggs, which you could have powdered eggs if you don't have chickens, and then you can mix in whatever leftover thing. For breakfast, you could have cornmeal mush with a dried fruit compote, oatmeal with cinnamon and raisins, muesli with dried fruit and yogurt, skillet granola, brown rice cereal with raisins and brown sugar. So see, it's not so bad if you have a plan in place and think it through and store a few essentials. All right. Want to see if I've missed anything. I will tell you that a lot of the most nutritious vegetables are also not all that expensive. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, cabbage, carrots, onions, kale, very nutritious, not expensive. Excellent soups, very nutritious, not expensive. This doesn't have to be an expensive venture. Another thing we can do to save some money is clear out junk food and start using that same money on products that will last and will feed our bodies well. Make your own mixes rather than buying the convenient products. This type of cooking works both now and later. It's good for now. It's good for financially difficult times. It's good for supply disruptions. It's good for any time. And it just takes practice, and actually I think you'll have fun with it. I look forward to sharing stories as we regroup on things you've tried that have worked and things you've come up against.